Hello, and welcome to the Tifo Football Podcast. I'm Joe Devine, and I'm now joined by Alex Stewart.
Good morning, Joe.
And Seb Stafford-Bloor.
Hello, Joe.
Hello. Now, this podcast is in two parts. Part numero deux is sensible transfers, where we discuss a number of interesting and exciting players, their current situations, stroke predicaments, and where they could end up, or where we think that would be fun for them to end up, if that makes sense. Hey, that bit's nice. And part one's also nice, in which Seb speaks to James Horncastle of The Athletic about Pirlo's Juventus and the season so far, and Italian tax law, which isn't as boring as it sounds. So that's exciting for us. But before we get started with all of that, there's a thing I've got to tell you about. Hey, I'm evangelizing about it. It's this cool. I found a website, Seb.
Did you? Tell me about it, please.
Football. You're going to read about it. You can. There's some listening. And tell you what, it doesn't matter what team you support, because there's always a person for you. And also other sports. That's The Athletic. So if you visit theathletic.com/Tifo, you can get everything I've just talked about, and more, actually a lot more, for £1 per week. It's a good thing. So, Alex?
Yeah?
Exactly. And that's all for now, and I will leave you in the cool hands and the very warm embrace of Mr. James Horncastle.
I know it's self-assessment time, so nobody run away when I say this, but we're going to talk about income tax in Italy and how it affects Italian footballers and foreign players moving to Serie A. And to do that, we've got James Horncastle with us. Hello, James.
Hello, Seb.
So let's start right at the beginning. And when you explain this, pretend that you're talking to like a child with, bad math. If I'm a foreign player and I'm moving to Serie A, what are the financial incentives at the time that we're recording this? What is I understand that there's kind of there's an appetite for change in these laws, but what has been the incentive previously?
Well, I suppose if you are being taxed the highest bracket in whatever country you're playing in, the incentive of going to Italy, I suppose, is that you'd go from being taxed at 45% to around 25%. So, that's a major advantage Italian clubs have had in the market. It's one of the reasons. I mean, if you listen to the president of La Liga, Javier Tebas, he believes that it's kind of chipped away at some of the competitiveness of Spanish clubs in the market, and the symbol of that is Cristiano Ronaldo moving from Real Madrid to Juventus. But I suppose the original intention of this law, it's called the Growth Decree, but it has another name, which is to kind of bring back the brain, sort of put an end to the brain drain that Italy experienced over the last 10 or 15 years. I mean, anyone who lives in London, New York, Berlin, they will hear Italian voices, they will work with Italians, because so many of them have left and not seeing opportunity for themselves. And that's why, other players, Italian players who've applied their trade abroad, Italian coaches who've applied their trade abroad, if they come back, they can also benefit from these tax breaks.
I understand it from a footballing perspective and as a measure to increase the competitiveness and allure of a domestic league. Makes perfect sense. Is it not a really difficult sell to the general public?
It is, but you've also got a football crazy public in Italy. Certainly supporters of top clubs yearn for the days of Serie A as it was in the kind of 80s and 90s, when it was the main place to be. I mean, Serie A doesn't call itself the best league in the world, like certain people who broadcast Premier League games do, but they do call it Il Campionato più bello del mondo, the most beautiful league in the world, and that was really kind of the tagline for it in the period I was talking about. And there are a range of efforts to try and get Serie A back to that. I think we had an interview on the site with the president of Serie A, Paolo Pino, about sort of going to private equity and seeking kind of outside experience and advice on how to grow the league. And a lot of that's just catch-up growth, doing some of the very simple things that the Premier League has done to market itself and make sure that it is seen all over the world. And I suppose this is another element of it. But as I said, initially it wasn't brought in specifically to favour football. It was to bring all kinds of people from all kinds of different walks of life, be it sort of bankers, entrepreneurs, creatives, back to Italy, and as football, given football's place within the entertainment industry, it kind of marries up quite well. But I would say at the moment, in terms to return to your question about its popularity, the main criticism and complaint has actually come from the revenue itself in Italy, in that we are missing out on so much potential revenue that could then obviously be directed in government spending, which as we've seen across the world, governments are having to go into the public pocket more than ever. So this has sowed some seeds of panic within Serie A over the last month as the revenue has kind of aired these grievances. Because as Serie A was already in a difficult financial position. That was one of the motivations for going to private equity in the first place. But since then, stadiums are empty. It looks at the moment we have no timeline on when crowds will be back in stadia. In terms of sponsorship and merchandise, obviously those contracts almost have to be revised for a COVID environment because sponsors are not getting the same exposure. So to all of a sudden then find that your payroll, which is already over 60% of what revenue you were making to begin with when times were good, for that to potentially get even bigger at this time is obviously a reason why there's beads of sweat forming on the brows of many Serie A presidents.
At least they sidestepped the MediaPro landmine, because obviously, like, yes. One of the preludes to what's happened in France is that a similar deal was nearly struck with Serie A, but with MediaPro. But unlike Ligue 1, Serie A were wise enough to check whether MediaPro could actually afford to fund the deal. What's been the reaction to that in Italy? The sort of the goings on in France.
Well, there's an element of we told you so, but as you mentioned, Serie A got so far down the line with MediaPro that they're in court at the moment, basically because it looked like that deal was practically done. And Serie A pulled out last minute, and all of a sudden you had Sky, as is the case in Germany, and England being the principal broadcaster, satellite TV rights holder, and DAZN coming into the market there to kind of to replace what MediaPro would have done. But I think in some respects the situation hasn't. All it did was maintain the status quo, I would say, in Italy, and that's not satisfactory because, I would say 10 years ago, Serie A had the most lucrative domestic television rights after the Premier League, and since then that has declined. It's slipped and slipped to the point that I think La Liga went ahead. The Bundesliga has done a better job of getting more value out of domestic TV rights, and certainly has kind of stepped up abroad as well. And again, this TV situation is one of the motivating factors behind engaging private equity, and potentially, I mean, this keeps being talked about, the league, exploring going away from the traditional broadcast model and setting up its own channel, and maybe that channel to be sold with direct access all over the world, as you see with, for example, the NBA and the NFL, where you can get Game Pass or League Pass and watch Serie A that way. So I think in some respects, yes. And I told you so. Kind of, we were right to get out rather than do a deal with MediaPro. But at the same time, yeah, they are still hoping for a better broadcast situation.
You know, it's interesting. You mentioned dedicated channels there. I've watched quite a few other sports which have those, which provide streaming opportunities, digital season tickets, basically. The NRL is a good example. The NFL, the NBA. Isn't it strange how football and football's public seems so resistant to that? I know we're heading off in a little bit of a speculative direction, but it seems it's strange. It's very, very hard to explain why that is.
I think so. Also, for a league to do it as a whole, as we've seen with the Premier League, when it's been impacted by the pandemic and fans not being able to get to games to watch their teams, is there really an appetite to watch I don't know, I'd say a Serie A equivalent, Crotone against Spezia? How many people are going to pay for that, subscribe for that? I think it's still one of the reasons why you see the top clubs in Italy really invest in what they call their media houses, which essentially specific companies set up to make the most of their content, broadcast it in whatever form they see fit, be it social, be it TV. Juventus, for example, have really tried to push in this direction since signing Cristiano Ronaldo. They really see the value of, I'd say, broadcasting socially. At the moment they've launched on Twitch, which, to be fair, I was completely unaware of what Twitch was until I saw that they were trying to start their own kind of show.
I still don't understand it.
Yeah, I've tried to grow familiar with it over the past fortnight, but again, trying to position themselves and position their content in places where new generations are lurking online or on their tablets, and so I think actually in some respects, teams like Juventus, Inter, and Roma are very, I don't want to say they're ahead of Premier League clubs in this regard, but they really see, they're really aware, they're really conscious of kind of getting into, they're always talking about Generation X, Generation Z in a way that, maybe we kind of roll our eyes when we hear it mentioned on a kind of Manchester United quarterly call, but that seems to be the driving focus. And whether you can marry that up with what a league as a whole wants to do in terms of the product they want to offer as a kind of one package, I don't know. We'll have to see. At the moment, the league has approved the sale of a stake in a media company to private equity, and we'll have to see what plans these private equity firms have to give us new ways of consuming Serie A content, I suppose.
That media approach, especially on social media, it reminds me of the way Dortmund used to behave right at the beginning of the last decade. It was as if when I see the kind of the output of clubs like Roma, it just seems like they were the ones paying attention to how you engage a kind of a younger audience and how you actually manipulate that space. Well, not manipulate, but you take advantage of that space to your benefit. It's really interesting to see who does and who doesn't follow that trend.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I remember, I think Juventus are moving more in this direction now, but for a time there was a feeling that a club of their history and tradition could not take the same approach that Roma are taking, which was very kind of left field, off the wall. Yeah. They were very creative. They didn't seem to let what people thought Roma were hold them back, and that allowed them, I think, to reach new people, new audiences, and kind of become known. I mean, it's a bit of a running joke that the only thing kind of Roma win are social media awards, but they are known for that, and it kind of brings people to Roma content, Roma results, Roma players in a way that just an ordinary approach would not. And I think in some respect Dortmund, yes, they have one of the biggest stadiums in Europe. They have some of the biggest gates in Europe. Obviously, they've they've done a really good job of becoming the go-to place for the best young players in the world. And I think that in itself has a ripple effect. It has a multiplier effect in terms of the club's appeal. But I would say it's, aside from being the Champions League winner, it feels like they have a disproportionately large place in our collective consciousness of who the great powers of football are in over the last decade, which I think they've just done a really good job of branding themselves and marketing themselves and capitalizing on what they had to make themselves popular. And I think that's something that a lot of clubs are seeking to learn from, although I do lament a lot of Bundesliga kind of social media banter.
Oh goodness, yes. Yeah.
I think there's a difference between that and the kind of the more concentrated drive or strategic approach that some of the clubs we've been talking about.
Well, there's a dividing line between Dortmund. To me, Dortmund's popularity is at least in part due to the fact, in this country at least, that they occupy. They present themselves in a way which is very attractive to English fans, because they have this binary relationship with a lot of major Premier League clubs, because they have the atmosphere, they have the vibrance within their ground, they have the kind of the sensible player trading model, and it appeals naturally. It's become the kind of they're the stick with which a lot of Premier League clubs get beaten. But yeah, I'd agree with you on kind of the banter end of that spectrum. Let's finish with Juventus, because Andrea Pirlo comes in over the summer or late summer, I guess. And it makes perfect sense because of what had happened with Maurizio Sarri, and possibly because of the age profile of that side and because of his standing in the game. But maybe it's a slightly tougher gig than assumed, and that's kind of borne out in the opening couple of months of the season. What's been, firstly, what was the expectation when he arrived? Rookie head coach, having to learn on the job. What was expected this season?
It's difficult at Juventus because they don't do transition years. At least that's the posturing that they put out. You have to win. I think that's more difficult than it has been really since 2015, I would say. I mean, I think the problem with kind of casual observers of Juventus is to think that they have always had absolute power. They've always been this dominant from 2011 to the present day, when in actual fact it hasn't been that way. No one expected them to win the league title under Conte. They had back-to-back 7th-place finishes. The first year of Agnelli's administration didn't go well. They sacked Gigi Del Neri, and it's only really with the breakthrough that Allegri made into Europe, where they were getting to Champions League finals, that they were able to sort of take the money from that and their own player trading model and establish themselves as really difficult to get close to. And only Sarri more recently was able to do that. I think they are, though, in transition, even though they won't admit it. They have been for 2 years. Since Allegri got fired, even though it was kind of a very amicable sacking, they have declined. And when you say worse with Juventus, it is entirely relative. It just means winning the league by fewer points and going out the Champions League earlier. But I think they've been bold and ambitious in that they want to play a style of football which has greater appeal to modern fans. I think they're very aware of that. I mean, we've just talked about how they're positioning themselves online. I think all of these things are joined up. And how do you do that with, initially what was an old defense? How do you tell Leonardo Bonucci and Giorgio Chiellini, who are very willing listeners and willing learners, that everything that they've been doing for the last 20 years, they could maybe do differently? Instead of enjoying defending in their own penalty area and playing man to man, we're going to play a high line and we're going to play zone. And we want you to play more out of the back. And, if Bonucci's always done that. So if they're man marking him, someone else have to do it. Is Chiellini comfortable doing that? So I think, we've seen them continue to go on that transition rather than go back to what worked for them in the past under Conte and Allegri. So Sarri to Pirlo, there's some continuity there in the ideas that they have. And it's clear that Pirlo, even though he is a rookie, has a very clear idea of how he wants this team to play. You know, he hasn't gone from one match week to another, changing his system, sort of being dissatisfied with their shape on the pitch. You know, they've pretty much played the same way from match day 1 to where we are now, match day 17. And, you know, while it feels like this could be the end of an era at Juventus, in that, you know, they've won the league title 9 years in a row. They desperately want to win a 10th in a row. They want that kind of fulfillment. They want it to have that kind of that round number effect to it. You know, I think it's also not far off from being the start of something as well, because, yeah, as Andrea Agnelli said after their elimination in the Champions League at the hands of Lyon, which was a big shock in August, yeah, he kept hearing down at his local bar, and bar in Italy means your coffee house, not your pub. That this team is old, that it needs rejuvenating. I think, again, people look at Buffon, they look at Chiellini, they look at Bonucci, they look at Ronaldo, and they see guys who are old. When in reality, for 2 or 3 years now, they've tried to bring through young players, and they have got a very young starting 11, I would say, which is again skewed by the presence on the squad of those veterans. You know, be it De Ligt, Demiral, be it Chiesa, be it Bentancur, Rabiot, Arthur. Up front, Morata is considerably younger than Mandzukic and Ronaldo, even though he's 28. Yeah, there's a core of a team there which is anything between 21 and 27. So I think what's fascinating, really, though, is can you play a collective pressing style when you have the number one individual in world football on your team? You know, that's one of the difficulties, things that the round holes that they have to square. And for the first time, Juventus have built kind of 3 teams, I would say, over this last decade, whilst they've been winning, and one after the other has been seamless. And that's because the first 2 in particular had the same foundations, the same defence. You know, Buffon, Chiellini, Bonucci, it was Barzagli, and this is the first time where they're having to transition away from that defence. You know, it's gone from BBC to Szczesny, who still doesn't get enough credit in my opinion, to De Ligt, Demiral, and these others. So I think that's one of the reasons why you're seeing more vulnerability to Juventus than we've come accustomed to.
Brilliant, James. That's fascinating. Well, we've got to let you go, but we'll have you back on in a couple of months, and we can catch up with Juve and see where they are with their maybe growing pains. But thank you so much for your time.
Pleasure.
Okay. Hey, thanks, James Horncastle. What a nice guy. Am I right?
Super nice guy.
I'm right. Hey, we're going to talk about sensible transfers now. Before we do, though, I've remembered Uncle Damien's gift to us, the trivia. Let's do a couple of trivia things quickly. Question. This one can be for Alex. Wayne Rooney played under-15s cricket for England. True or false?
Certainly plausible. I'm going to say false, though.
Yes, it is false. Well done.
Thank you.
Seb, here's one for you. In which country was cyclist Bradley Wiggins born? Was it England, Scotland, or Belgium?
I feel like that's a trick question. I'm going to say Belgium.
It is a trick question. It is Belgium.
Ha.
One more. You can both, let's see who answers this first. 5 clues about this thing or person. 1, I describe my ethnic makeup as Cablinasian. No takers. 2, in my early life, I was described as a child prodigy. No takers. 3, my first name is Eldrick. No takers. 4, I have won 15 majors, including 5 Masters.
Tiger Woods.
There we go. Seb wins. Okay. That's the end of that game. Well, it was fun, wasn't it? Sensible transfers now. There's a number of names on our list. I would like to begin somewhere exciting and sparkly and bright in Paul Pogba. Because, listen, we're recording this before the weekend, by the way, so it's very possible that something good or bad or something nothing has happened with Paul Pogba in the game against Liverpool. We have no idea what the outcome of that is, but we can say to this point that recently, or at least since the turn of the new year, since December, Paul Pogba has performed pretty well for Manchester United and turned in some of the better performances of his recent time there, which is getting people excited, of course, because they are currently, as we record this, top of the league. Having Pogba playing well is a treat that I think few people would have 100% expected before Christmas, Seb.
It's very hard not to be at least a little bit cynical about it, because his upturn in form coincides with his agent Mino Raiola declaring that he'll most likely leave the club at the end of the season. But nevertheless, even if this is a kind of a last hurrah, looks like we're going to get 6 months of what Paul Pogba was always intended to be. And he's been great. Not only has he played very well, he's started to crop up at really important moments. And that's obviously what you want from a sort of a talismanic midfielder. And it'd be good because I think whatever you think about his form, I think the background discussion, the kind of the tedious tabloid chatter about his haircuts and all that kind of thing, and the tone of that discussion has been incredibly tedious. So it's, even from a neutral's perspective, it's really nice to see him playing well and to see him sort of confound a few critics, which has been an important way to leave if this is to be the end.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he scored the important one and only goal against Burnley the other day that took Manchester United top of the league. Alex, presumably there are very few opportunities in terms of destinations for him outside of Manchester United. A small number of clubs that could afford him, despite the fact that it's likely that his value has come down, not just as a result of the footballing economy at the moment, through the pandemic, but also as a result of his time at Manchester United.
Yeah, and I'd say that's particularly the case with his last season, because if you remember, we go back to 2018-19, he got 13 goals and 9 assists. So that's very much, a peak central midfielder, still only 25 at that juncture. But last season, 1 goal and 3 assists. So yeah, his value will have declined significantly in terms of the cost of a transfer, but of course that doesn't take into account wages, signing bonus, and of course agent fee, which is always going to be high with Pogba. So that it does restrict it. He's not going to go to another English club. So you're looking at Paris Saint-Germain, which seems like a very credible destination, particularly given that Pochettino's there now, and I think that probably gives a bit more credibility to that project. Real Madrid.
He could really suit that Dembele role as well, right? That's where I imagine him playing under Pochettino, the sort of, the midfield progressor, the person who can break the press, carrying the ball.
Yeah, and of course with PSG, where their midfield is well stocked is in more destructive, competitive players. They do have Verratti, who's a very good progressive passer of the ball, but also a good defender. But I could see PSG playing a midfield 3 with somebody like Idrissa Gueye anchoring it, Verratti as a slightly deeper, defensively minded progressive passer, and then Pogba is the one who bursts forward, carries the ball. Like you say, he has that ability to break a press through carrying, but also pinging passes around. It seems like a very good fit from a footballing perspective, but also obviously from the perspective of Pogba returning to France. Financially it works because PSG are kind of exempt from the other issues that France is facing in terms of football, and the two big Spanish clubs are not as wealthy as they would have been a couple of years back.
Yeah, okay. I mean, the other thing to think about is his contract length at the moment, which I believe that the club took an option to extend it to the summer of 2022, last October. So really, to recoup any of the investment that they made on him, they're going to need to sell him in the coming summer, right, Seb?
Yeah, I thought so. I would be surprised if the mindset of Man United is really about recouping. I think at this stage, if he doesn't want to be there, if he's decided between, if he and Raiola have decided that he's definitely off this summer, then I think the conversation becomes about sort of just getting him off the wage bill, especially now, especially with income hit. across world football, just because it gives Man United the kind of the room within their finances to think ahead, to kind of plot the long-term future of their midfield behind Bruno Fernandes.
Because that's what they're so good at.
Yeah. Well, it's what they'll hopefully be trying to get better at. I mean, eventually that has to happen just by law of averages. So we'll see. But I mean, I don't think you're going to get a big fee for him just because of his age and because of the conditions around the world. Even PSG, you're not going to get a PSG to spend £100 million in this market, and nor is Pogba worth that anymore, really.
Do you know what's interesting though is I'm looking at transfer marks now and their market value for Paul Pogba over time. At its high, it was at its highest in 2019, where he was valued at £90 million. You can see up until very recently, October 2020, he was valued at 72 million, and there's a drop off to 58 as of December of 2020. So I wonder if that will be partly pandemic related, perhaps partly form related too. Also, perhaps, I don't know if it's related to the thought that he's more likely to leave once out, therefore, will be less difficult to prize away. I'm not sure. How does that work? How do you experience a almost 20 million drop in 2 months? Presumably it is related to the economy.
These things are quite arbitrary. Ultimately a player is worth what somebody's prepared to pay for them. And obviously contract and surrounding circumstances make sense. What I would look at with a graph like that is less what the absolute values are and more what the relative values across time are, because I think it's very fair to say that Pogba's value has dropped. When it was at its highest point, it was, like I said, coming off the back of that season where he'd scored 13 and got 9 assists in the league. But I don't think you can necessarily infer that the actual value that's ascribed to him carries a lot of weight, particularly in this current market.
So in terms of places he could move to, then we talked about PSG already. We've mentioned Real Madrid in the video, Alex, where we discuss him sort of sitting in that Valverde role, really, don't we? Do you see that as genuinely working? Because I mean, it feels like the most obvious option in a way, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, I'd probably look to push Valverde across to the right-hand side and have Pogba on the left. Casemiro is still relatively young for that team. I think he's 28, so I can see him anchoring that midfield and it giving a nice blend of passing. I think from a footballing perspective, Real Madrid and PSG are the two that make the most sense. They also happen to make sense financially, particularly PSG. But with Real, there's that kudos. I think Real have wanted a player like Pogba for some time. Obviously, their last big transfer in Eden Hazard hasn't worked out. And although Pogba is not the player that he was by reputation 2 seasons ago, he's still very much, a World Cup winner, somebody with immense following, popularity, and would suit what Real are trying to do and give a bit of a boost to a club that maybe needs some more shine than they've had in the last couple of seasons.
Well, right, because you're right. I mean, his output is perhaps not the same as it was a couple of seasons ago, but I expected his age, only 27 years old, that potential is still there.
And the output is contextual. Last season he only played 1,200 league minutes, and they've sort of struggled to find a place for him in United. So it's not to say that he's not going to do well if he moves to somebody where he's more suited to that system.
No, and I think sort of, sidestepping entirely the conversation around how much of it is the club's fault, how much of it is his fault. When I see a player who clearly has the ability, particularly to a level of Paul Pogba, not performing, I don't care where they go. I just want to see them at their best for at least a season or two, because Paul Pogba, there's no doubt in my mind, could be an absolute world beater. And it just feels like I don't want him to retire with the sort of general public perception and perhaps his own perception being that he never quite lived up to other people's or his own expectations. He has that opportunity still, 27 years old. So my choice for him would be wherever he's going to be best afforded the opportunity to do that.
It's a spectacle, isn't it? You feel if you don't get to see a player performing at the apex of his potential, you feel a little bit like you've been cheated of it. Not by the player. I'm not meant to be accusatory. It's just that's what football is. If you're a Manchester United fan, okay, maybe it's a little bit different. But as a neutral, you want to see the best players perform at their best. That's fairly natural.
Yeah. Speaking of the best players, Seb, have you included Lionel Messi in today's list?
I have not. I have blocked about 30 different people on Twitter.
That's so weird. Well, if you want to be blocked by Seb and you want us to talk about Lionel Messi in the Sensible Transfer series, then I would suggest that you go to Twitter and at Seb Stafford Bloor and please ask him for Messi, because I have a sneaking suspicion that the more people that ask him, the more likely it is that he'll relent.
Can I just add something here? In the
Absolutely not. Moving on to talk about Erling Haaland now. Sorry, Erling Haaland, Borussia Dortmund, another huge player. With lots of potential. Hey, he scores goals, doesn't he? Doesn't he? Yes, he does. His release clause kicks in next year. What is his release clause?
£68 million.
Is that all?
Mm-hmm.
It's open season, boys. Maybe we could sign him for the Athletic. You never know. That feels like not very much money in comparison to what he almost certainly is worth, a gazillion. Okay. I mean, there feels like obvious places here too. We've just talked about Real Madrid. That seems like an opportunity. All of the big clubs will be interested. The one that I'm most interested in is the one that came out in might even be today's video, Alex, Manchester City. And a little known detail, it might be more widely known. It was little known in my mind, i.e. I didn't know it, which didn't make the final cut of the video, is that his dad played for Man City.
His dad did play for Man City. His dad was the recipient of Roy Keane's famous Reducer Challenge that is spoken about in Roy Keane's autobiography at some length and in mildly grisly detail. So there is clearly.
Does that mean he'll hate
there.
Roy Keane? Because that you sort of inherit your father's enemies, don't you?
My father doesn't have any enemies, so
my father's enemy was the corporate world and life, of course. But,
okay,
life is everyone's enemy. Carry on.
Yeah, so there's a connection there, and his dad, definitely has a significant influence on his career. When he moved to Dortmund, there was talk about him moving to Manchester United. That didn't happen, and I think there was quite possibly some sort of let's not do that yet. And this is a player who has not had a season where he hasn't scored a goal a game or more since he was 17 at Molde. He's an extraordinary talent, and
that's no easy feat in the Bundesliga either, is it?
Well, no, and the transition from RB Salzburg to Dortmund, it is a step up, obviously, but it's the kind of transition that makes sense given Salzburg's playing style. That there's an emphasis on pressing, there's a physicality, so it was a sensible jump to make. And his output, yes, it's dropped off slightly, but not an enormous amount given the step up in league, and obviously that Dortmund have had difficulties this season. He's still managed to score 12 goals and get 2 assists in the league. He's an incredibly powerful striker. He makes similar kinds of runs. He finishes a lot of his goals in the same way, where he kind of jinks into the left-hand side of the penalty area and then pulls a shot back across. But as we said in the video, just because you know what a player's going to do doesn't mean that you can stop them doing it, because this combination of pace and physical strength and the cleanness with which he strikes the ball means that he's still incredibly hard to get a handle on as a defender.
Presumably there'll be a number of clubs, Seb, that would, I guess dependent on the footballing economy, trigger his release clause, right? I mean, he's going to have options, you would have thought.
You'd have thought so. I think it's going to come down to system. He's going to be in a situation where he can pretty much choose his club within reason. And he and his agent, also Mino Raiola, are just going to pick somewhere, an environment which suits his goal scoring abilities. And that's what's really interesting, because I think over time we've moved on from the assumption that he's kind of a blunt object, like a big, quick destroyer, basically, to actually a really accomplished footballer. If you look, for instance, at the goal he scored against RB Leipzig a couple of weeks ago, the first goal he scores in that game, then you see the build-up play, you see the awareness of sort of smaller, shiftier players around him, more skillful kind of creative types, and then the ability to go to the back post and thunder in a header over the top of a defender. You're looking at kind of you're looking at a very complete footballer, very complete forward, and also someone who theoretically can, as we point out in the video, play for Guardiola, play in that kind of system. And I think you're quite right. This sort of diversity in his game is going to mean that as and when that release clause comes active, and we think it's in 2022, in the summer of 2022, then you could have as many as 10 clubs going head to head for him, which is incredible. It could actually be the most boring transfer saga of all time, which is quite some accomplishment if you think of it.
But also, it's possible that it's going to encourage clubs who are particularly keen and worried that they might lose out to others next summer to bid this summer, right?
I would have thought so. I mean,
like you're going to get Man United or a club like that with that sort of desperate appeal, thinking they might lose. If they know that there's going to be 6 or 7 other teams in the running, all offering the same amount of money, and the choice will be determined by where the player wants most to play. Then presumably you want to be, there'll be some clubs that want to have far fewer names on that list.
Hey, big time. Also, it's one of those situations where
did you just call me big time?
I refer to your point as in a kind of big time.
You said, "Hey, big time," and then you started talking. I'll take that. Come on.
For people listening, like Joe, every now and again he tries to kind of involve new nicknames for himself in the podcast or in a sort of general conversation, and you kind of you tried Jay Dizzle about 6 months ago. That's Jay never Dizzle. Ever catching on ever.
J drop the J, hit the J, JD, smack the J, smack the J up.
Big Joe.
Double JD,
Joe Devine, all capital letters. None of these are happening. In this instance, like if you're an English club, you probably want to enter this auction now because you're in the privileged position of having an enormous broadcasting contract behind you. And there are some issues in English football, but before the Spanish giants come back into it, before perhaps I don't really see him going to Bayern Munich, but maybe before they're able to enter the market again.
Hey, well, your 100 million is the equivalent to their 60, right? Based on
exactly that. You can afford to go above the release clause this summer.
Yeah, England.
I think the only issue with that, and I agree with everything that Seb said. I'm just going to keep going, irrespective of the silliness in the background.
You are the least tolerant person of silliness I've ever met.
So Borussia Dortmund have these. Lots of good young players. People
Joe,
like
make a funny noise.
He's cracking a bit.
Jadon Sancho, Gio Reyna.
That's right.
Haaland is the only player that they don't have a natural replacement in the squad for, or where they don't have sufficient kind of flexibility in terms of who else is there to be able to lose him. So it's very much in Dortmund's interests to wait until that release clause comes in, which is still a decent chunk of money, because they haven't got a replacement lined up. Their only other natural striker in the squad is on loan from Real Madrid, Renier, and they might terminate that loan early anyway. So it's a different situation. It's like selling Sancho. Yes, obviously you want to keep hold of Sancho, but they have other players that can play on that right-hand side. There is no other Haaland, but there's also no other striker in that squad. So it's Dortmund are going to be doing their very, very best to hold on to him. Sure. And it would take a much larger bid, I think, than something that's closer to the release clause if people want to get him now.
Well, like you said, it also depends on Jadon Sancho, doesn't it? Because, there's a couple of big players there. They're not going to let both of them go at the same time. So I think it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. Who becomes the narrative of summer 2021? One thing I'd like to say about Haaland is not inferring anything about his personality from this, but just based purely on his physical looks. He just has this face that constantly looks so pleased with himself, doesn't he? And hey, if you're Haaland, I'd be pleased with myself too. Not to say that I'm not saying he actually is. I'm just saying his face makes him look like he is. Is anyone with me?
Yeah, he looks like a big friendly monster, doesn't he? In a way, he's also quite a strange guy. Like the night before, when he was at RB Salzburg, sorry. The night before he made his Champions League debut, he went on Instagram and he was driving around downtown Salzburg in his car with the Champions League anthem playing as loudly as possible. And he was just driving around it's probably still out there. So have a search for that. And it's quite That's
Yes,
quite endearing. I
please.
find that quite cute.
No, I like
it's just
it.
really, really excited, and that's
Also,
cool.
there's
I like
something
that.
about people who are infused with total self-confidence that just wins me over. Even if I think they're a complete dickhead, it just wins me over. Like I don't know what it is about my personality, but I feel like I would have been susceptible to some of history's dictators for very similar reasons. But let's not go there. Anyway. Maybe we shouldn't leave that in. I'm not a danger on the internet. I promise. I'm a safe and liberal man. Alex, tell me about Diego Rossi.
Diego Rossi is an interesting player. He's Uruguayan. He went straight from Penarol to MLS, where he's been playing for Los Angeles FC.
Penarol.
Penarol is they're basically the biggest historical team in Uruguay.
Penarol.
Because it's got that little
Penarol.
So he's a little tricky winger, great dribbler. He was one of the 5 nominated MVPs for MLS's 2020 season, although he didn't win. That was Alejandro Pozuelo who won. He's got a very good goal return.
Ex-Swansea City, Pozuelo.
I don't know.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
I'm not entirely sure. But he's got a very good return for a team that kind of doesn't necessarily do that well. I think they finished 7th this time round in their group. So, and at only 22, he could very easily step up and move somewhere. I would say from a kind of cultural perspective, Spain is the most likely destination for him. He's a natural Spanish speaker as a Uruguayan, but also he's a sort of diminutive playmaker, dribbler with the ball. You can see him working in a team that likes to put players behind a defensive line, and where there's maybe slightly less physicality in that league. I'm not sure he would necessarily adapt to the Premier League straight away, for example. But he's a good, exciting player to watch. He's a lot of fun.
Can I say, firstly, it is the same player, I believe. The Pozuelo was the Swansea player, now plays for Toronto. The second thing to say is, I love America. The country of America, the landscapes. Not so much the recent politics, but
what's your favourite part of America?
My favourite part of America is Texas. That's irrelevant, Seb. The point I'm making is, if you're a young player and you live in America, hey, you live in LA, Los Angeles, right? Do you really want to move to Europe even though the football's better? I'm sure you're going to say yes, but you live in America. Isn't that what everyone's supposed to want to do?
Yeah, you want the credibility of playing in Europe. I mean, whether you deserve credibility for doing that is neither here nor there. That's kind
but
of
think
the way
about
the
how
world
many
thinks.
TV channels this guy's going to have because he lives in America. Do you really want to go to Spain where
Yeah,
there
but
are, I would say, fewer TV channels?
Yeah, but Joe, advert breaks every 10 minutes in America. Like,
that's the dominating factor when players
the
are going.
deciding factor. And
Hey, what's
also
Spain's equivalent of the Dairy Queen? I bet they don't even have one.
coffee in America.
Sure, they
is
have
not
the
very
bull
good.
race and they have delicious cheeses.
What do you mean
some-
the coffee in America's not good?
I prefer European coffee. Well, not European coffee, obviously, like African or South American coffee, but as
They have that in
presented
America as well.
Yeah, no.
The question I'm really asking is, how are these environmental forces going to play on the mind of a young player from LA? Presumably not at all.
What are we talking about? Coffee now and TV channels, or
No,
I've
that was just
completely
a
lost
fun,
the point of
that was just a fun bit. What I want to know is, if you're a young player, you're doing well in MLS, you're making a name for yourself. Do you really want to go to Europe? Like, isn't there more, nowadays more of a pull? I'm sure 10 years ago this was different, but the MLS I should say, is developing into something. What I'm saying is there not enough reason to think that having a career in MLS, even if you are good enough to play in Europe, isn't the worst thing?
Well, depends what you want from the game. I mean, if you want money, obviously Europe is the better deal. But also remember that in America, MLS, no matter how improved it is still nowhere close to the major sports. So are you a top tier athlete if you play MLS football? Not really. I mean, not MLS football. I understand that doesn't really make sense. But you're not your premium athletes are going to be NBA players, NFL players, baseball players. in England, in Europe, in Spain, in these countries which are more traditional football places, you enjoy a level of status which you just can't access as a football player in America.
But what about freedom?
So
Also available in other countries.
So the other really good winger this season. So there's a very good, if anyone's interested, there's a very good website called American Soccer Analysis, who do great things with stats, and they're on Twitter as well. And they have Rossi as being basically the second most effective winger in MLS last season. The most effective was a guy called Jordan Morris, who is a 26-year-old who plays for the Seattle Sounders, and he's currently being linked with Swansea quite heavily. So that indicates that, a player who is very, very good, if not among the sort of 10 best players in MLS, is still very open to moves even to a championship team. Mark McKenzie, who was the best centre-back in the league last year, has just moved to Genk in Belgium. Very, very much a stepping stone club before you move to a better one, because Belgium's very good for that. So I think even your points about coffee and freedom notwithstanding, the players clearly are showing that that's a move that they want to make.
Can I say though, just think about this young player trading in Seattle, the home of grunge music, the Nirvana, Kurt Cobain. For Swansea, the home
I tell you,
dead
America does
poet.
breakfast very well. That's the thing I think of a lot. Like if you want breakfast, and if you were to go for breakfast anywhere in the world, America.
But they have such huge portions.
But that's it, Alex. Like there's just.
But if you're a
variations.
professional athlete, do you really want to be eating?
I don't know. Like I'll wear a bin bag to training or something and sweat it all out. I just. But it's the breakfast is excellent in America.
As someone who lives in a British city, I think the Americans make great use of space. So all those big roads and the cars. I like big things because I'm big. Tell you what, when I went to America, I saw the first Harry Potter film in an American cinema, and I sat in a seat that was the size of a boat, and I ate. I had a drink out of a cup that was bigger than my head. And I would fit in America in a way that I don't fit here. So I like America. That's all I'm saying. All I'm saying is I like America. Hey, we have a lot of Americans who listen, people from the United States. Hey, I don't know why I want to say to you, but I'm just saying I like America. America's a cool place. Yeah, and I'm excited for America to be a cool place again. That's mainly what I'm saying. Keep it out of football, you fucking mug. Keep it out. Don't mention it. We've got time for one more player, and I am going to select. We've talked about Conrad Laimer a lot before, so I'm going to ignore Conrad Laimer.
We had a request for Ryan Christie. I think we should do that.
Okay, right. Instead, let's talk about Ryan Christie from Celtic, 25 years old, all-purpose forward. Not all-porpoise, sorry, I said that wrong. He isn't a porpoise, he's a human man. All-purpose forward. Probably the only real bright spot of Celtic season so far, Alex. Is he all-porpoise?
He's more narwhal, possibly. I think. He's an interesting player. He's been, I think it's probably fair to say, relatively misused by Neil Lennon, who's had him playing on the right-hand side of a midfield diamond quite a lot. He's a left-footed creative player. He can play as a right inside forward or a 10. Statistically, he measures up extremely well. If you compare him to players of his profile in top European leagues, he gets forward a lot, he creates a lot. Somebody who wants a kind of all-purpose, well, as you said, all-purpose forward, but somebody who is able to create and also get forwards and score goals. He needs tactical discipline, which he's not really getting from Lennon at the moment. So his shooting profile this season is really bad. Like he's taking shots from all over the place, partly because Celtic are relying on him to be the guy who makes something happen. This, interestingly, has kind of turned the fan base against him slightly. So he maybe would feel like a move is not the worst idea either, because he's obviously not being used particularly well by Lennon, but also the fans are getting frustrated with him. I think he probably could step up to a Premier League side. I think he would fit at Southampton. Actually, I mean, Stuart Armstrong is the incumbent in that position and really, really good, but I can see that working out. I could also see him at somewhere like Crystal Palace, who at the moment have Andros Townsend playing on the right-hand side, but somebody who cuts in a lot, who's expected to shoot from that sort of angle where he's cut inside and then lets one go. Yeah. Obviously, on the left, they've got Etse at the moment, who's doing that really, really well, but the right-hand side does look considerably weaker, and Christie would be an upgrade, I think, in that perspective, and at 25 still has a good period of time left as a porpoise.
I just wanted to shout out the people who asked for Ryan Christie. We have Grant Gendo, who asked, Adrian Vanderboer also asked, thank you, and Stuart Thompson asked for Ryan Christie. So I figured I'd do that because some of the other names, many people have asked for, but just 3 people requesting Ryan Christie there. So thanks to everyone who has participated and contributed. There'll be one more Sensible Transfers episode, and then we will be out of here. And we'll still be here, but we'll be doing other things. Don't know what.
Here
Probably.
we've got an exciting guest for the next one as well. We've got a bit of David Ornstein.
Oh mate, is
joining
it
us.
Confirmed?
It is indeed confirmed. David Ornstein's going to talk to us about transfer reporting and
the
life
daddy
as a
of the transfer
reporter.
window. Hey?
Exactly, big bad Ornstein.
You know what? David Ornstein would work in America, wouldn't he? I could see him in America.
He's got that crossover appeal. I don't know what crossover appeal means, but I've heard that.
No. He would interest Hollywood if he was an English actor. That's what I'm saying.
Oh, I see.
Like, if he was a kind of English stage actor, I think his profile, even his looks, he'd interest America. David Ornstein.
He's got a Louis Theroux quality to him. I think
that's true. Yeah, but like
if he grew the hair a little bit, then
he's
could,
Louis Theroux the hunk. Yeah. Watched an incredibly depressing Louis Theroux last night about insanity, and then I went to bed at 2 a.m. So
I listened to the Oliver Stone podcast he did on my night walk last night.
Yeah, my mother told me about that. She said it was very good.
It was very good. Your mother is right.
Yeah, I still haven't watched JFK.
Oh, mate.
JFK
it's just like film. 5 hours long or something, and then I feel I never feel like there's the time.
It's a fantastic 3.5 hours. Honestly,
this is what everybody says.
That's a task for your weekend, and
I'm surprised you've not watched it because you're quite filmy, aren't you?
Yeah,
like
I am. But there's a number of exceptionally long films like that I haven't watched. I mean, I only ever watched Hard to Be a God because I went to the cinema. Do you know what I'm saying? I never would have sat through that shit otherwise. But the point I'm making is that there's some out there, but maybe I'll watch it. I don't know. But I also do get pestered by Seb every day to make sure I'm watching the football, so I feel like I don't have time to watch JFK. It's almost an insult that you're suggesting that I do it this weekend, Seb.
That's fair enough. But I honestly, it should be on your list. It's a fantastic film.
I second that.
Okay. Well, thanks to you both. I hope everyone else has watched JFK and, Dreams of America. We'll be back on Thursday with our final Sensible Transfers episode. So if there's anybody that you're desperate for us to talk about, this will be your last opportunity to ask Seb to include Messi, and we'll see if we do. Please leave a comment on the community post or tweet one of us or, stand outside our houses and scream through the windows, that sort of thing. And
stop sending me message requests on Facebook about Leo Messi, please.
No, please don't stop. Please don't stop. It's honestly, in the bleak, midwinter, in the weeks of January when work is busy and there's a lockdown, like the one thing that gives me joy throughout the week is seeing people asking Seb for Messi. So please don't stop, whatever you do. Just do it. All right, we'll be back next time. So thanks for listening, and au revoir.
Bye-bye.